Don't worry. No one's going to remember what you contributed anyway. The words hovered in the bright stillness of Jason Brooks's modern office as I stared down at the severance agreement I'd just signed. 5 years of 70-hour workweeks reduced to a digital signature and a throwaway comment. I kept my expression steady, though I could feel the tightness building across my chest. I appreciate the opportunity, I said, standing up with a calm I didn't quite feel. Professional to the very end. That was me. Emily Carter, Senior Systems Engineer. Or rather, former Senior Systems Engineer as of 3 minutes ago. Jason didn't even glance up from his laptop. The Denver sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, lighting up his perfect haircut and the polished edges of a space we'd renovated after landing our first round of series of funding. $10 million to scale the company I had helped build from scratch. I walked slowly across the open office, passing rows of engineers who had no idea I wouldn't be returning the next day. Some of them were writing code that relied directly on the systems I had designed. Late nights, coffee-fueled marathons, patches held together with hope and stubbornness. That architecture was mine, built line by line in a dusty warehouse downtown before we could afford real office space. When I worked through summer heat with no air conditioning, sweat running down my back. Clocking out early? Asked Kyle from across his desk, one of the newer hires who hadn't yet picked up on what was happening. Something like that, I said, smiling without warmth. Packing didn't take long. There wasn't much left to take. A potted plant, a framed photo of my sister's kids, and a coffee mug I'd used since the first week. 5 years of my life and everything personal fit into one canvas bag. The rest of me was still embedded in the system they thought they now owned. As I stood waiting for the elevator, a chill worked its way up my spine. Jason's remark about no one remembering my work wasn't just insulting, it was false. Every major component of that infrastructure had my fingerprints on it. My documentation style was unique, structured in a way only I fully understood, packed with shorthand references that meant nothing to anyone else. I'd always meant to write the full guide, but there was always something more urgent to handle. The elevator doors slid open and I stepped inside. Just before they closed, I looked back one last time at the office I'd poured everything into. And that's when the thought struck me, they really had no idea what they'd just done. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I was suddenly, powerfully aware of what I was worth. And of exactly where every early architecture file, version log and piece of IP-related communication with my name on it was stored. My whole life I'd lived in the long shadow of my father's failure. He was a gifted engineer who built a revolutionary battery system in the 90s, only to be pushed out when the company went public, his name erased from every press release. I swore I'd never let that happen to me. But here I was 29 years old, walking out of Arcadia Tech with a severance check and a non-disclosure agreement I'd read line by line. The NDA covered corporate secrets, but not my personal workflows or the backup files I'd already sent to my attorney. I saw this coming weeks ago. The closed-door meetings. The careful investor introductions. The way Jason started showcasing Brandon, the consultant they brought in, like he'd always been part of the team. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Driving home I called Rachel. They let me go, I said, flat but clear. They're replacing me with someone more experienced. She didn't pause. I see, Rachel replied, her voice cool, already calculating the next steps. The severance package included 6 months' salary, the standard NDA, and nothing regarding intellectual property beyond what had already been outlined in my employment contract. Smart girl, Rachel said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The files you sent look solid. Let's meet tomorrow to talk options. The next morning I didn't feel that familiar urge to check Slack or sift through unread emails. Instead I slept in until 9, a luxury I hadn't allowed myself in years, cooked a real breakfast and drove to Rachel's office with a strange but welcome sense of ease. She had laid out all my files across the polished surface of her conference table. Architecture diagrams, version logs, emails that clearly traced my contributions, and most critically, proof that I had designed the custom authentication system that made Arcadia Tech's product so distinct in the market. You've been thorough, Rachel said, her eyes scanning the documents. Most people don't think to document like this. I shrugged. My dad always told me to keep receipts. She leaned back slightly. So, what do you want to do with all this? I took a moment before answering. I wasn't someone who sought revenge. I hadn't been raised that way, but I had been taught to understand and protect my own value. Nothing for now, I said. But I want to be ready. Rachel nodded once, slowly. They always come looking. Companies like that never realize what they've lost until it's too late. When they do, we'll be ready. Leaving her office, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. My time was finally my own and I intended to use it wisely. 3 weeks after being let go, I was sitting in a beachfront cafe, sipping an overpriced latte and scrolling through job postings when my phone rang. The caller ID read Adam Reynolds, Arcadia Tech's CTO. "Emily," he said, his voice forced and overly cheerful. "How have you been?" "Fine, Adam," I replied, keeping my tone flat. "What can I do for you?" "Well," he began, "the team's working on the next release and they had a few questions about your architecture. I was hoping you might have a few minutes for a quick consultation." I took a slow sip from my cup. "Consultation," I echoed, letting the word hang there. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, given the circumstances of my departure." Adam cleared his throat. "Look, Emily, we're happy to pay for your time. Jason may have acted a bit hastily." I nearly smiled. "Hastily? Is that what we're calling it now?" There was a pause. "The documentation is a bit specialized." That nearly made me laugh. Specialized was his polite way of admitting that my shorthand was indecipherable to the rest of the team. Sure, I had documented everything, but I'd done it in a style tailored to my own thought process and clearly no one else could follow it. "I'm afraid I'm a bit busy at the moment," I said calmly. "Perhaps Brandon, with all his experience, can figure it out." "Emily," Adam started, but I cut him off. "I wish you all the best, Adam. Truly." I ended the call. Moments later, my phone buzzed again. A text from him. "We can double your consultation rate. Please reconsider." I set the phone down without responding. Let them sit with it. That evening, while I was making dinner, an email came in from Tyler Cooper, one of the junior engineers I'd mentored over the years. The subject line read, "You won't believe this." Tyler had always been grateful for the time I'd spent guiding him when no one else bothered. His message was short. "Emily, everything's falling apart here. Brandon can't make sense of your authentication system. 3 clients have already reported serious issues after the latest deployment. Jason's blaming the engineering team, but everyone knows it's because they can't understand your architecture. Adam is freaking out. Just thought you should know. I miss having you here." I sat at my kitchen counter, rereading his words, the screen glowing softly in the darkening room. I hadn't expected things to fall apart so fast. A part of me felt a small flicker of concern for the people still inside. They were mostly decent folks, just caught in a mess not of their making. But another part of me, the one that still remembered Jason's smug, careless dismissal, felt the first sharp sting of satisfaction. My phone rang again. This time it was Rachel. "I just got a call from Arcadia Tech's legal team," she said. "They want to discuss some kind of consulting arrangement." I raised my eyebrows, surprised things had escalated so quickly. "Apparently they're dealing with a few technical difficulties," she added, her tone flat but pointed. "What's your take?" I asked, though I already had an idea. "I think we let them sweat a little longer," Rachel replied. "The more desperate they are, the stronger your position." As I ended the call, I felt something shift inside me, a subtle but undeniable realignment. I wasn't angry anymore. This wasn't about revenge. It was about acknowledgement. About being seen for what I was worth. And it seemed finally that worth was being recognized. By week 4, the calls became more frequent. Adam reached out again. Then Brandon. Even Tyler sent me a quiet message asking if I might consider helping. I kept my distance, replying vaguely when I replied at all. While they were scrambling to patch together what I had built, I was meeting with executives from 3 rival firms. Not looking for a job but surveying the landscape, learning how much leverage I actually had. Then on a sunny Tuesday morning, exactly 1 month after I'd carried that canvas tote out of the office, Jason called. "Emily," he began, his voice tight, trying hard to sound like his usual composed self. "I think there may have been some misunderstanding. The board and I have been talking, and we're realizing now that your departure might not have been handled correctly." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, deliberately keeping my voice neutral. "Regarding what exactly?" There was a pause. "Regarding your value to the company," Jason said, and I could practically hear how hard the words were for him to say. We'd like to bring you back as a consultant to help with the transition. I almost threw his words back at him. No one's going to remember your contributions. But I held back. No need to show my hand. I'm not interested in consulting, I said calmly. But thank you for the offer. Emily, come on, be reasonable. We're offering a significant fee. Low six figures. Just a few weeks of work. I didn't hesitate. I'm quite busy at the moment, I said, echoing what I'd told Adam. Best of luck with everything. And I hung up. I called Rachel immediately. Jason just called. He offered me a consulting role, I told her. 6 figures. They're panicking, she said. But we can't rush this. We need to tread carefully. I've been watching their platform, I confirmed. Arcadia Tech's client dashboard had been glitching for days. Their support team on Twitter was posting around the clock. And their stock, which had spiked after the funding round, had now dropped 15% in a single week. It's not looking good for them. Perfect, Rachel replied. I've been digging on my end too. Did you know Jason has been presenting your authentication system to the investors as his own work? A cold jolt went through me. What? I have a contact on the board. He's been taking credit for your work for years. They weren't funding the company's tech. They were backing his vision. And they had no idea the technical core was all yours. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. One thing was letting me go. Another was rewriting history and stealing my name off the foundation I'd laid. That crossed a line I hadn't fully expected. What's our next step? I asked, my voice sharper now, stripped of hesitation. Rachel didn't hesitate. We wait 1 more week, she said. Let it fall further. Let them feel it. Then we send a formal notification asserting retained intellectual property rights, Rachel said calmly. Can we even do that? I signed their employment contract, I asked, still unsure. The contract covers work produced strictly within the scope of your employment, she explained. But that custom authentication system, the one that makes Arcadia Tech's product what it is, you started building it on your own time before they ever hired you. You've got a dated GitHub repo to back it up. You brought the concept with you, enhanced it to suit their needs, but the original core IP arguably still belongs to you. I remembered those early weekends vividly, sitting in my cramped apartment, writing and rewriting the first prototype line by line. It had been my personal side project, long before Jason ever reached out about a position at Arcadia Tech. I'd even mentioned it during onboarding, but he brushed it off like it didn't matter. That casual dismissal might end up costing him everything. So we actually have leverage, I said slowly, the reality starting to crystallize. More than leverage, Rachel replied, eyes sharp. We have a legal claim strong enough to freeze their operations, if we decide to use it. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of her words settle. I had left Arcadia Tech feeling small and powerless. No. The balance of power had shifted so completely that for a second I almost pitied them. Almost. By the 5th week after my dismissal, things inside the company hit a wall. Their stock had taken another 20% nosedive, and the industry chatter was getting loud. Clients pulling out, trust eroding. The calls stopped. And the silence that followed felt even more desperate than all the voicemails that came before. I was at home halfway through a documentary when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I nearly froze. Standing on my porch, expression unreadable, was Olivia Harris, the lead investor from Threshold Ventures. Miss Carter, she said without preamble. Apologies for the unannounced visit, but this couldn't wait. May I come in? I paused, then nodded, stepping aside. Olivia and I had only exchanged polite greetings during presentations, never anything personal. I'll be direct, she said, lowering herself onto the couch. Arcadia Tech is in serious trouble, and I think you already know why. I've heard they're having some technical issues, I replied carefully. She fixed her eyes on mine, unwavering. The authentication system is failing. No one on the team can make sense of it. Jason told us redundancies were in place in case key staff left. That was clearly a lie. I said nothing. And here's the bigger problem, she continued. We've uncovered serious inconsistencies between what we were told and what's actually true about the company's technical leadership. Jason portrayed himself as the architect of the system, with you as just the executor of his ideas. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. Is that really what he told you? Yes, she said. But our advisors have reviewed everything and it's now clear. You were the one who built it. Jason misrepresented your role. That deception played a part in securing our investment. I exhaled slowly. I'm not surprised. But I am disappointed. Olivia nodded once. So am I. Threshold invested $10 million based on a false premise. That's why I'm here, Emily. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. Jason doesn't know about this conversation. But I believe it's critical that you attend. I hadn't expected this. I was prepared for legal moves, not a seat at the board table. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. That you tell the truth. Help us understand what's going on and what solutions still exist. In return, I'll personally ensure that your contributions are acknowledged and respected moving forward. I thought for a moment before replying. I appreciate that, Ms. Harris. But my attorney's been clear. I'm not to engage directly with Arcadia Tech without proper legal protection. Olivia didn't flinch. Understood, she said. Then what if we include your attorney in the meeting? This isn't about backroom deals. This is about full transparency. Transparency, Olivia said firmly. The investors deserve to know what's actually happening behind the scenes. I sat with her words, weighing the risks. Attending a board meeting would expose me directly, but it might also give me the chance to speak to the only people with the power to fix what had gone wrong. I'll need to talk to my attorney, I said finally. Of course, Olivia nodded, standing to leave. The meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow. I hope to see you there. As soon as the door closed behind her, I called Rachel and filled her in on the unexpected visit. This is earlier than I anticipated, she said thoughtfully, but potentially very useful. If you attend, you'll be going in from a position of strength, not desperation. I hesitated. What about our original strategy, the formal notification? We move forward with it, Rachel said confidently. In fact, I recommend we send it tonight. That way they'll know exactly where you stand when you enter that room. I agreed and she promised to deliver the notice right away. That night I barely slept. Tomorrow would be a confrontation I hadn't asked for, but one I was more than ready to face. I wasn't walking in for revenge. I was going to correct the story they tried to rewrite. Jason had tried to erase me from the narrative of Arcadia Tech's success. But tomorrow I would write myself back in. This time in ink that wouldn't wash away. The offices looked exactly the same as when I left 6 weeks earlier. Polished floors, minimalist lobby, the same generic artwork on the walls. But everything felt different. I walked through reception with Rachel beside me, our footsteps echoing, heads turning as we passed. The whispers followed us all the way to the glass-walled conference room. Inside, the tension hung like fog. Around the long table sat the board members, including Olivia Harris, 3 other investors, and the company's executive team. Jason was already there, sitting at the head of the table. The easy confidence he was known for had drained from his face. Adam, the CTO, looked like he hadn't slept in days. Miss Carter, thank you for joining us, Olivia said, standing to greet me. And this must be your attorney, Ms. Bennett. That's right, Rachel replied smoothly, placing her briefcase on the table. We received your invitation and came in good faith. But I'd like to note that we delivered a formal notice of retained intellectual property rights to Arcadia Tech's legal counsel last night. Jason's face turned red, his voice rising. This is ridiculous. You signed an employment agreement stating that all work product belongs to the company. I know exactly what I signed, I said, keeping my tone measured. But the authentication system in question was originally built before I ever joined Arcadia Tech. I have complete documentation, including a GitHub repository with verified timestamps. One of the investors, a silver-haired man I recognized as Victor Lee from Magnitude Capital, leaned forward slightly. Is this true, Jason? Did you know about this? Jason's jaw clenched. Emily's making this sound more significant than it is. Maybe she had some early-stage code, but anything meaningful was built on our time. I opened my laptop, connected to the conference room screen, and took a breath. With your permission, I'd like to show the relevant records. Olivia gave a quiet nod and I pulled up the GitHub repository. The commit history was crystal clear, with files and comments dated months before I ever signed an offer letter. Then I brought up a chain of internal emails between Jason and me. Messages from my first weeks at the company, where I specifically told him I was adapting my existing authentication system for our product. You'll note, Rachel added, that Mr. Brooks acknowledged Emily's prior work in these communications, but he never formalized any transfer of intellectual property beyond the standard employment contract, which doesn't apply to pre-existing work. The room fell into uneasy silence as the board members exchanged glances. Jason shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. There's more, I said, clicking through to the next set of slides. These are investor materials from the Series A round. You'll see the authentication system listed as a key competitive advantage, yet my name is nowhere in the credits. Victor Lee removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Jason, you positioned yourself as the technical visionary behind this technology. I supervised its development, Jason insisted, reaching for control. Supervision is not creation, I countered. And your supervision mostly involved setting impossible deadlines while taking public credit for the outcomes. Adam, who had remained quiet up until that point, cleared his throat. I can confirm, he said softly, that Emily was the lead architect of the authentication system. We've been unable to properly maintain it without her, as the last 6 weeks have made painfully clear. Jason shot Adam a furious glare, but the damage was done. The board members were no longer skeptical. They were openly disturbed. What exactly are you asking for here, Miss Carter? One of them asked. Rachel stepped in smoothly. My client is not here to dismantle Arcadia Tech. She still believes in the product she helped create. However, she is requesting formal recognition for her contributions, fair compensation for her intellectual property, and written guarantees that her work will never again be misrepresented. And if those terms are rejected? Jason snapped. Then the IP notice remains in force, Rachel replied calmly. And Arcadia Tech will be legally barred from using the authentication system, effectively rendering your product inoperable. The truth sank invisibly. Arcadia Tech's $10 million valuation, their client contracts, their growth roadmap, everything hung in the balance. And I, the engineer they had dismissed so easily, now held the system they could no longer function without. The board meeting dragged on for another 3 hours. The more they uncovered, the more Jason's credibility unraveled. As evidence stacked up, even the most hesitant board members began to shift. After a short recess, they returned with renewed resolve. Olivia Harris stood and addressed the room. After careful consideration, she said, the board has reached several decisions. First, we are implementing a leadership change effective immediately. Jason, we appreciate your role in founding Arcadia Tech, but the misrepresentations under your leadership can no longer be overlooked. Jason went pale. You can't be serious. I built this company from the ground up. With Emily's technology, Victor Lee added bluntly. A fact you deliberately hid from us. Olivia continued, steady and firm. Second, we're offering Emily the role of Chief Technology Officer, with appropriate equity and full recognition of her prior contributions. My breath caught. It was more than I'd dared to expect. And third, she said, we're proposing a formal licensing agreement for the authentication system, including royalties on all future revenues derived from it. I looked over at Rachel. This met nearly every term we'd hoped for. Finally, Olivia concluded, we'll issue a public correction acknowledging Emily as the principal architect of Arcadia Tech's core technology. Jason stood abruptly red-faced. This is a mistake. You're giving the company to someone who held it hostage. I looked at him evenly. I didn't hold it hostage, Jason. I protected what I built, and made sure the truth came out. Victor Lee spoke next. The board's decision is final. You may accept a reduced advisory role or you may step down entirely. That's your choice. Jason looked around the table for support. He found none. Without another word, he stormed out, the door slamming behind him. As the room settled, I realized the satisfaction I felt wasn't about winning. It was about justice. 3 months later, I stood on a small stage inside Arcadia Tech's headquarters, facing our team and a handful of journalists. The company had changed. So had I. Today marks a milestone, I said. Not just a platform update, but a reset built on transparency and collaborative innovation. What once had been my solitary creation was now maintained by a skilled team, all properly credited. The documentation was thorough and open. We would never again rely on one person's memory to keep us afloat. After the announcement, Olivia joined me, her smile bright. The investors are thrilled. Complaints are down 87% and we're seeing clients return. It's been a team effort, I told her, genuinely proud of what we had built. True, she said. But your leadership made it possible. Oh, and have you heard about Jason? I shook my head. He turned down the board's offer. Left completely. He's trying to start another company now, but he's struggling. Apparently, investors aren't exactly lining up to fund him. Word travels. For a brief second, I felt a flicker of sympathy. I hope he learns something from all this, I said. So do I, Olivia replied. Though some lessons are more expensive than others. Later that day, I received an email from Jason. Just a few lines. Emily, I owe you an apology. I should have respected your work instead of trying to erase it. Arcadia Tech is in better hands now. Jason. I sat at my desk for a long moment rereading it. Finally, I typed a reply. Jason, thank you for the apology. I wish you well in whatever comes next. Sometimes the most painful lessons are the ones that matter most. But this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about finally being seen. And I was.